Okay, so it's almost 2026, and this is the time of the year where we start being reflective and planning for the future. But the question that I've got is, why is it that we can have the perfect plan? We can have the vision board, we can have the note cards that tell us where we want to get to, we can have all the talent in the world, yet the goals that we set ourselves, especially for me, for example, the ones in the sports creative industry, at least in the past, can still feel impossibly far away. Why is it that the goals that we set ourselves still feel far away? And the answer, or the working answer that I'm working through at the minute, is that it's not down to a lack of effort, it's conflict with our brain's operating system. Our brain is wired to reject the possibility of those things coming to fruition. Bear with me here. So our brains are like a confirmation bias machine. So the brain acts as a filter, right? It receives an overwhelming amount of data every second, and it has to screen out over 99% of it. This is a fact. It's neuroscience. I learned this from, there's Joe Dispenza who talks about this, but there's also I think it's Emily M on the Brain. I'm not sure what her surname is, but her handle is M on the Brain. She talks about this all the time. She's got a PhD in neuroscience. So our brains have to screen out 99% of what actually happens, of reality. To anyone who's ever played the yellow car game, you don't spot a yellow car until you force your brain to try and spot a yellow car, and then you see that they're everywhere. It's kind of the same thing. You need to wire your brain to observe what it is that you want it to observe, because it does filter out 99% of reality. This is also supported by Robert Glover, who's the author of the seminal book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, and he defines the filter perfectly. He writes that data that does not fit our paradigm is screened out and never reaches our conscious mind. Information that does fit our paradigm is magnified by the process. So our filter, our brains, prioritize predictability and not possibility. This is the key. Our brains don't observe what's possible, it observes what's predictable. And this is an evolutionary hack to help us survive, but in modern times, it can also hamstring us from achieving what it is that we actually want to achieve, right? So the problem isn't the world. If we consider the world as neutral, the problem is that our filter determines whether things are good or bad. So our existing paradigm is what the issue is. We are actively filtering out the data and opportunities that confirm our success. We're actively filtering out the things, the keys, the shortcuts, the catalysts to our success. So, how do we rewrite the fundamental codes, the operating system of the most protected organ as well in our body? How do we force our brains to accept a reality that actually seems impossible right now? And that requires a pro-level neuroscience hack, to use the phrasing of M on the Brain. And we're going to go into that right now. So this hack is the delusion hack, right? You need to become the personality. There's actually, slight tangent, there's a TikTok creator, I can't remember her name, but she talks about how in order to level up one's style, in order to glow up, we need to figure out who our celebrity lookalike is, because celebrities have stylists, they can afford stylists. So the stylists are being paid to make them look really good. So they'll pick the clothing that suits their shape, their skin color, their skin tones, their whole aesthetic, beard, no beard, whatever it might be. So if you can copy their styles, or the parts of their styles that you like, you might glow up a little bit. And she says that she looks like Dua Lipa, but she calls herself a little bit delusional in it. So she calls herself Delulu Lipa, which has stuck with me. And I think it's similar in rewiring your brain as well. So rewiring our brain is simple, I think, but it's also terrifying because our minds are rational. We need to become delusional. For example, for me, before becoming a designer, I had to put myself in the shoes of a designer and a creative and think, what is it that I'd be doing if I already was this person? Right? So what does this all mean? So Again, if we look at M on the brain, she says that being delusional is actually a pro-level neuroscience hack. Your brain is wired for predictability, not possibility. And so it filters your reality for what's familiar to you, manifests in a number of different ways. If you've been in like negative situations in the past, negative relationships, even if you're in the most safe, secure, comfortable, lovely relationship after that, you might spot the things, the triggers that remind you of the past one. So we need to be aware of that and try to rewire. That's just one example, but it also happens in career. We need to try and rewire our underlying beliefs. So being delusional and put like this can happen by putting things on a vision board and genuinely acting as if we have those things. We're teaching our brain that the goal is possible. So Joe Dispenza, he's probably one of the most popular people when it comes to like neuroscience and neuroscience hacks and rewiring the brain. So he's a renowned lecturer, researcher, and author on neuroscience, epigenetics, and quantum physics. He explains the practical steps of this reprogramming, of this rewiring that I'm talking about. He says, and I quote, the person who wants to become wealthy, they've got to romance wealth. You're trying to attract the thing that you want, right? They have to start thinking about how a wealthy person would act, how a wealthy person would feel. And you would have to become that personality. You have to become that person. This links to what I was saying before about putting the cart before the horse. You need to become the person. You need to think that you are the person before you actually become that person. Does that make sense? You need to convince yourself of it before you can rationally be convinced that you are it. If that makes sense. So, but this isn't just fluffy thinking. I know that this is a lot of la 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 woo woo kind of chat, but this is rooted in science and it's freeing the body and the mind from the past, from past experiences, and enabling what Dr. Dispenza calls synchronicities. And these are the real changes in your personality that stretch your belief. So it's accepting and doing away with the past, which is what we keep clawing back to because we've seen it, it's rooted in reality, and it's wiring our brains to accept possibility. So this powerful intentional act of creating a new self raises a critical social question. If our identity is shifting, what happens to the relationships that we've built on our old safer identity? How does that change? Because once we do away with the past and we accelerate towards possibility, does that mean that we just neglect the person that we were, or can we take some of that person with us? So when we change our beliefs, the people around us can feel uncomfortable or hostile. Why is that? And it's because we're changing the character that these people thought that they were relating to. Most relationships, sadly, are not actually real connections, right? So this links to Eckhart Tolle, what Eckhart Tolle says. And it links to a few things that I've said in the past. So, you know, the whole net worth is your network is your net worth kind of thing. You are the sum average of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with. So you need to choose the people that you spend a lot of time with carefully. And, you know, the amount of time that we spend with our parents only ever goes down over time. And the amount of time that we spend with friends tends to go down. The amount of time that we spend with colleagues kind of peaks and then goes down. But the amount of time that we spend with our spouse only goes up. So we need to make sure that the people that we're spending a lot of time with reflect the person that we're trying to become. But all relationships are not real connections anyway, and this is because of ego. So Eckhart Tolle in A New Earth discusses identification, this core mechanism, which we can't get away with, but I think it's important to be aware of it in this whole discussion. So Tolle explains the conceptual image your mind has made of yourself is relating to its own creation, which is the conceptual image it has made of the other person. The result is that every egoic interaction between 2 people is in reality the interaction between 4 conceptual, mind-made identities that are ultimately fictions. There is no true relationship. So I am myself and you are you. If we meet, there are 4 different egos going on. I've got my perception of myself, I've got my perception of you, you've got your perception of me and you've got your perception of yourself. And if these can exist in harmony, then we can be friends. But if they clash, if my perception of you doesn't line up with your own perception of yourself, then that's what creates friction. But the overall message is that all four of these identities are fictions. The only reality is me, who I am right now, as I am, like my essence and your essence. And the egos are just layers that we put on. I've spoken about this before as well. But I think it's an interesting it's an interesting caveat in the context of this whole conversation of becoming and rewiring our brains in order to become someone. Because even though in modern reality and modern society, it's important to have that recognition, it's also important to understand that these people that we're trying to become, or the person that we're trying to do away with, the person who we're trying to evolve from, they're all fictions. But that should also be empowering. None of this is set in stone. They're all fictions. So why can we not create our fiction to be as useful, as kind, as caring, as successful as possible? And the reason that we don't do it is because of our underlying beliefs. But they're all fictions anyway. But we identify so closely to these fictions. And I think that's part of what hamstrings us. So recognizing the conceptual fiction of the ego is the first step towards authentic connection. It allows us to disidentify from our past self and past relationships, and it allows us to move forward in becoming. As I said, if we're going to identify with a fiction anyway, which is perfectly reasonable, everyone has an ego really, then why don't we choose a really good one? Why don't we rewire our brains to allow us to accept a really successful one? Everything's a fiction anyway. The ultimate consequence of this, though, is realizing that if relationships are subjective creations, which I've just described, then the emotional charge that we place on anything, our work, our wins, our failures, is also an intentional choice or a lack of intention, right? If our brains are actively creating a fictional, self reinforcing reality, then what actually is the real world? Mind blown. Is it inherently good? Is it inherently bad? Is it inherently difficult? As I said earlier, reality, I'm throwing the idea out there that reality is completely neutral. Okay. And all we have are subjective interpretations, and we create our own fictions as a result of those interpretations. And the fictions can be whatever we want. But for some reason, we default to the fictions that reinforce our own beliefs. Well, it's not for some reason, it's a survival mechanism. But the issue is that our own beliefs don't necessarily look like success a lot of the time. We need to rewire our own beliefs for success. This whole idea is made really explicit in the book, The Courage to Be Disliked, which I've spoken about to death. It's a modern guide to Adlerian psychology, but it's really good. One of the quotations from the book from the philosopher is, "We cannot alter objective facts, but subjective interpretations can be altered as much as one likes. We are inhabitants of a subjective world. This means the world you see is different from the one that I see." I actually learned this implicitly when I was studying history at uni, because there's, I suppose, a tangent of history called historiography, which my understanding of it is that it's looking at the way different writers have interpreted an event. Now, history is history, an event is an event, but it kind of blew my mind as to how many different views of one event that there are. And my whole degree, essentially, degrees, was to take a bunch of different views about one event and come up with my own opinion on it. So, and the same is true for reality. One thing happens, but my subjective interpretation of that, my subjective view of that, is inevitably going to be different to everyone else's. And the way I feel about it is going to be different to everyone else's, because I've had my own experiences and everyone's had their own experiences, and you relate to different things differently, right? So your world, the world that you see, is different to the one that I see. There's an article called Think Like Reality as well, written by Eliza Yudkowsky. Um, and in Think Like Reality, they say that probability theory tells us that surprise is the measure of a poor hypothesis. So think about an experiment. If we run an experiment and we're surprised by the outcome, then the hypothesis in the first place was a poor one, because we create a hypothesis for an experiment. And if we prove the hypothesis, then we're not surprised. We're like, oh, yeah, this creates that. My hypothesis can be, if I continue to blow air in a balloon, it's going to pop. Lo and behold, if I continue to blow air in a balloon, it pops. That's not surprising. However, if my hypothesis is, if I keep blowing air into a balloon, it will continue to grow and grow and grow and grow forever and ever. And then in the experiment, it pops and I'm surprised. That means the hypothesis itself was wrong. Not to labor the point, but that's just illustrating it in a different way. So if a model is consistently surprised, then it's probably time to discard that model entirely. So if we use this same framework to discuss our lives, if we're constantly surprised at our life, then our original hypothesis about how things are going to be probably is wrong. And the writer is encouraging us to reshape our intuitions so that the universe looks normal. So we're trying to think like reality, so we're not surprised. This just writes home the idea that our interpretations are subjective. And if we can rewrite our subjectivity to not be surprised, then we can also rewrite our subjectivity to attract success and to see abundance and to see success everywhere. So for me and for people like me, in terms of the audience of this podcast, the kind of designer, creative person, this is probably one of the more powerful takeaways. Frustration, indignation, and shock are not objective truths about the world. They are just data points telling you that our internal model is wrong. If we feel negatively about things, it might be an indication that our internal model, our internal beliefs are wrong. So in this way, like, the highest creative act is not changing the world, but intentionally choosing the subjective meaning that we assign to the world. And this allows us to kind of bypass the drama and move directly to intentional designed action. So it's all about understanding that the world is neutral. Our brains are filtering out most of what happens anyway. Our brain is already filtering a lot of stuff out. And to change that filter, to tweak it so that stuff that we take into our consciousness is more positive, we need to have more positive underlying beliefs. And that's the T, basically. And the ways that we can do that is by putting ourselves in the shoes before we feel like we're ready and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. The vision boards and mood boards, for sure. Exposing ourselves to different people who might have already achieved or be going towards what we want to achieve. You know, I always find myself feeling so inspired after going on holiday, going abroad somewhere, because you feel like, I don't know, anything is possible. Your eyes open up so much. There's a song by Tyler, the Creator. It's in Call Me If You Get Lost. And he's just talking. And I'm pretty sure he says his passport is the most valuable thing that he has. And he's talking about it in the context of travel. And I make him right. Traveling is really, really important, and seeing different cultures and being exposed to what's possible, what is actually out there, is worth its weight in gold. And the more that we can expose ourselves to things that help adjust our underlying beliefs to see what actually is possible and what is actually out there, and to make us feel more open to the possibility of success, especially in the UK, which has a massive crabs in the bucket problem, the better and the easier it will be for us to move towards that. It's a lot easier to achieve something when you believe that you actually can do it and you've seen it actually be there. A lot of the time, I was having a conversation last night actually with someone talking about starting on social media, and I was saying, why don't you do it? And he was like, just, I haven't got the right business plan and I don't want to put my face on it and all these different things. And it's all completely manufactured, subjective, underlying negative beliefs. And I was like, you just need to get over yourself. It's very simple. I call myself out a lot for the things that I just need to get over myself for as well. And once you do that and you put yourself in those shoes, then you realize that you already were that person. You just need to put yourself in that place. And I'm pretty sure that's what Pharrell Williams tweeted one time. You're already that person. You just need to put yourself in that place. And the way to do that, it all starts off with changing your underlying beliefs and the filter that filters out most of reality so that you only take in the things that are beneficial to you and the things that will help you move forward into what it is that you really want. You're already being subjective about the world. You may as well be subjective in the direction of what you want. You're already creating your own fictions. Why not write the best story ever? And that's a good place to finish, I think. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, if you got something out of this, please share it with someone who you think would also get something out of this, who you think would also enjoy it. Please also follow the podcast on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, follow it on Apple Podcasts as well. If there's anything in particular that you'd like to be discussed, I'm going to do like a Q&A episode at some point soon. So please send in questions. And I really appreciate you for listening. Thank you very much. And I will see you all on the next one.